You hand the client over on Monday. By Wednesday, you've taken the work back. The client hasn't complained. The team member hasn't made some spectacular fuck up of it. You simply started thinking ahead. What if the client notices the difference? What if the quality is not as good? What if they start wondering why they're paying your company when they could have hired someone cheaper? And before the client has said a word, the work is back with you. It's the bit I want to deal with in this video, because the decision to hand work over is often made logically, but the decision to take it back is usually made emotionally. And when that happens, your prediction has beaten your decision. And this matters because a cybersecurity consultancy can look bigger on paper while staying just as dependent on you, the founder. You've hired people, payroll has gone up, there are more names in the team meeting, but the important client work still finds its way back to you. The team might prepare it, you end up deciding it. They might draft it, you end up reviewing it. They join the call, but you handle the awkward bit. And then everyone wonders why the consultancy still feels small, why it's not really growing. It feels small because the amount of work that can happen without you hasn't changed. The real ceiling here, and it shows up in your diary, in your calendar, before it shows up anywhere else. There are only so many client calls you can attend in a week, so many reports you can review or draft yourself, so many difficult conversations that you can personally show up for and hold the space for. And at some point, your consultancy is going to reach the capacity of your calendar. And this is where it gets a bit sneaky, because you'll tell yourself the client isn't ready for someone else. But most of the time, the client never said that. You've said it for them. They'll sometimes ask about your processes, your controls, insurance, business continuity planning, who has access to what happens if somebody leaves. They might even want to know how you make sure that the service continues when key people aren't available. What they generally don't ask is, will you as the founder personally write every report for them? They don't ask that because they're buying from a company, which makes it slightly ironic when you're sitting there convincing yourself that the client will panic the minute somebody else steps in to do some or any of the work. I completely understand where that comes from. You were probably on the original sales call. You were the person who built the relationship. You were probably the person who spotted the real problem when everybody else was looking in the wrong place. And when something got difficult, you stepped in and sorted it out. So when you think they hired me, you're not making the whole thing up. There is some truth in it. But then you started filling in the rest of the story. The client asks a question and you think, they don't trust John. They copy you into an email and you think, they want me involved. There's a pause on the call and suddenly the chimp on your shoulder is going, there you are. I knew this would happen because you brought somebody else in to do the work for you. So what do? You step back in. Of course you do. It's your business. You're used to being the person who fixes things, and in the moment, it feels responsible to do that. But now, John has lost the chance to deal with it. The client has learned to wait for you, and you're back doing the work that you handed over on Monday. So that handover hasn't failed. You've just felt uncomfortable. And when your name, your reputation, your business name, your business reputation, and a valuable client are all involved, discomfort can look an awful lot like evidence. So you don't need to vanish from the client's life. You stay close to the relationship while your team member begins to own the delivery. Maybe you stay on the first few calls, maybe you review the first report, maybe the difficult conversations still come through you for a short while. That's fine, but there has to be a point where you step back. Otherwise, you'll never get anything handed over. You'll have added supervision to an already packed week. And I think this is where founders get caught. They're waiting to feel confident before they feel comfortable letting go. But confidence usually comes afterwards. It's after the client's actually worked with a new person, after a bit of work has gone out and nobody's complained about it, after something small has gone wrong and your team member has managed to deal with it adequately, and after a Thursday afternoon has come and gone and thankfully nothing's fallen apart or landed back on your to-do list. You need something real to happen before your brain will stop producing all of those what ifs. That's what my SAIL method helps you do. S stands for story, A for audit, L for likelihood, E for execute, and another E for emerge. I use sale when someone has started treating a prediction as if it's already happened. And it starts with the story. What is the story you're selling yourself? Put it into one sentence. Be specific. What does it really boil down to? Something like the client will lose confidence when John starts running the reporting cycle. That gives you something useful. I'm going to ruin the relationship by giving John the work. Doesn't. That's so broad. Your brain could spend the rest of the week finding reasons to believe it. So get specific. Why do you think this will happen? When do you think it'll happen? What do you think the client will notice? What do you think they'll actually say? What do you think will happen next? Whatever you can think of. Then we audit it. And this isn't about arguing with yourself or pretending everything's going to be grand. The thing is, sometimes these thoughts or beliefs pop into our heads, but they're not always true or factual or real. So we start with the evidence that supports the concern. The client knows you. Yeah. They've asked for you personally before. Yeah. John is newer to the account. Fair enough. Now, what else is true? Has John already done part of the work? Has he produced something the client liked or didn't like? Has he handled an issue without you? Has he delivered well when you weren't in the meeting? And what don't you know yet? Quite often, the biggest unknown is what the client thinks because nobody's taught to ask them. This part of sale came out of a coaching call that I had with a client who kept telling me she was rubbish at sales. She was completely convinced of it and kept going, I'm so bad at sales. Every time we had a call. So I was like, okay, hold on now. How do you know that that's true? So she was like, well, this is happening. I'm like, you're not really clear there on the numbers. So I want you to go back and look at your last 10 booked sales calls. How many people turned up? How many people bought? Where did the calls come from? I wanted to gather all of the data. So she came back to me on the following call and told me that her conversion rate was actually over 83%. And she realized she wasn't terrible at sales at all. What she determined from doing this exercise and gathering the evidence, auditing what actually happened, was that the number of people booking calls and then failing to show up, that's where the issue was. Completely different problem and much easier to fix. It also proved that the story she was selling herself, and let's be honest, she was beating herself up about it, was utter BS. That's why the audit matters. It stops you solving the problem in your head and shows you the one that's actually there. And then we look at likelihood. How likely is the outcome you're predicting? Could John need a bit of correction? Yes, maybe. Could the client ask why things are changing? Of course they could. They're well within their rights to do that. Could there be an awkward moment on a call? Quite possibly. But across every founder I've coached through handing over delivery, not one client has lost the client because somebody else started doing the work. That number is 0. That's my own coaching experience, not an industry-wide study, but it's still useful because it gives you something solid to weigh against the story in your head. And the story in your head can move very quickly. If the client hesitates for half a second, you think they've lost confidence or trust in you, but 5 minutes later, you've mentally lost the account, damaged your reputation, ruined your weekend, and fucked with your cash flow over the next month, all before anyone has actually complained. And by the way, this isn't me going to town on your what ifs. There's research called effective forecasting. Basically, we're often quite poor at predicting how bad a future event will feel and how long the impact will last. But we're so freaking good at imagining the worst. And we're shite at remembering that we'd deal with it if that worst part actually came to fruition. That we can do hard things. So ask yourself, what do I think is going to happen? What's the evidence that it might actually happen? On a scale of 1 to 100, how likely is it really? And what would I do if it did happen? Because once you know what you'd do next, the risk usually stops feeling quite so enormous. And then you execute, which simply means you stop thinking about handing over a client and you actually hand one over. You speak to the client before anything changes, you introduce the team member properly, you explain why you've chosen them to look after this client and what they're going to own, and you tell everybody how the review period will work. You might say, for the next 2 weeks, John will run the reporting cycle and the follow-up actions. I'll review everything before it goes over to you. We'll have a review at the end of the 2 weeks. And of course, if there's any issue, you can raise it with John during that period. After that, John will own the delivery. I'll still be involved in the relationship and any strategic decisions, and we'll catch up quarterly to evaluate and adjust accordingly. That gives your client some continuity. It gives John proper ownership, and it gives you a date when you're supposed to step back, because I'll review it after 2 weeks is a plan. I'll stay copied in for now is how you end up reading a client email at like 10:40 p.m. on a Sunday night 7 months later while insisting you're only keeping an eye on things. Ugh, the thought of that makes me anxious. Okay. Lastly, we get to emerge, and this is a bit that people often forget. So go back and look at what actually happened. Did the client lose confidence? Did they accept John? What did John handle well? What needed a bit of help? And what can he take on next? I had another client who'd hired a salesperson, and the salesperson booked an introductory call and then couldn't attend it. So my client had to take the call himself, and he started telling himself the prospect wouldn't accept him because the introduction hadn't happened in the normal, warm, relationship-led way he was used to. He was expecting rejection before he'd even joined the call, but he took it, and that conversation later turned into a proposal for him and an incredible relationship. He'd spent loads of time worrying that he wouldn't be accepted. The call and the relationship have actually since opened up a much, much bigger opportunity. And that's why you have to come back and look at the result. Otherwise, you can get good evidence and still carry that old story into your next decision. So think about the person on your team who has been nearly ready for 6 months. What have you actually allowed them to prove to you? Because they can't build trust with the client if they're permanently hidden behind you. And the client can't learn to trust the business if every important conversation still comes back through you. Every time you jump in, you teach the client to hang on until you're available. Every time your team member handles something well, the client gets another reason to trust your company. That allows you to step out of the weeds and step back from the business and let your business be independent of you. And that's how you move from having a contracting vehicle that happens to employ a few people to having a proper business. It happens one client conversation at a time. One thing I'd avoid here is a silent handover, because I've seen plenty of these during my 20 years in retail banking. A client would suddenly discover that they had a new relationship manager and they'd be furious. And usually they didn't have any issue with the new person. They were furious because the old person hadn't bothered to tell them there's a new person coming in. And so they felt passed around. And sometimes the whole thing could have been avoided with one quick conversation. So tell the client before the person sending the emails or lifting the phone changes. Tell them who the person is, explain why you trust them, and be clear about what you still be involved in. Don't let a temporary safety net become the way the business operates forever. And once you hand over delivery properly, you get to choose what job you actually want. You might want to step away from most of the client work and become the CEO. You might love the delivery and want to keep doing it. That's possible too. You can bring in a general manager to run the people, the operations, and the growth while you focus on the work you're brilliant at. But you have to let them run it. Hiring someone to manage the business and then overruling them every day is a very expensive way of staying in control of everything. Or you can continue doing both. You can run the business and stay involved in delivery. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but it comes with a ceiling. There are only so many hours in your week. Leadership takes some, sales takes some, client conversations, proposals, and admin, they all take their share. Whatever is left is the amount of delivery you can personally do. You can keep doing both. You just can't keep doing both and pretending that there isn't a ceiling. So have a look at your own company. Which client relationships still depend on you being involved in every interaction? Where have you decided what the client will think before they've said anything? And where has a 2-week review period somehow been running 8 months later? Because if your consultancy is already doing well, but the client's delivery and difficult decisions still keep coming back to you, that's exactly the problem that I help cybersecurity founders solve. There's a link in the description where you can apply to work with me. We'll look at where the business still depends on you, what's keeping it that way, and whether Millionize, the built beyond you system, is the right next step for you and your business. The client handover survives the week when you stop treating the story you're selling yourself as proof. Name the story, audit what you actually know, look at the likelihood, execute a controlled handover, then emerge with the evidence. Learning to let go means giving the client, your team, and most of all yourself, the chance to trust the business you've built.